Story 1. When I was in high school, there was this one kid who swore up and down that he was a demon. I do not even feel right typing out his real name. It gives me the creeps, and you will see why soon. For this story, I am just going to call him Charlie. His actual name sounded like something out of an old English play or a fantasy novel. Charlie was, to put it lightly, strange. He was painfully awkward, never seemed to know how to act around people, and had this deadpan stare that could make anyone, teachers included, uncomfortable. He always wore this ratty gray hoodie, and I mean always. I am almost certain the thing never saw the inside of a washing machine because Charlie smelled bad. Not just forgot deodorant bad, but what is that stench bad? He was not tall or striking, really just a regular-looking guy. But you would not notice that because he always kept his hood up and wore these sunglasses, even inside. Eventually, teachers stopped fighting that battle because Charlie just refused to take them off. Then there was the really weird part. Charlie did not have any friends, not in the usual sense. What he did do was adopt people. I know, it sounds bizarre, but if Charlie liked you, and that seemed to be a decision he made out of the blue, he would walk up to you and say, "You're adopted." That was it. No explanation, no context. Apparently, it meant you were part of his circle, and, by his logic, safe from whatever supernatural nonsense he claimed he could do. He did not adopt many people, though. Lucky me, I was one of them. Looking back, I think it was because he had a thing for me. Nobody took his whole demon act seriously. We all just figured Charlie was dealing with some heavy stuff. And trust me, he was not winning any popularity contests. This all went down in Wayne, Pennsylvania, where I grew up. My friend Gabby was another one of Charlie's adoptions. Unlike with me, Charlie's crush on her was painfully obvious to everyone. One afternoon, Gabby and I were hanging out with our friends Laura and Luke on the dugouts behind the school. Somehow, the conversation drifted to Charlie and his not-so-subtle crush on Gabby. We were all laughing about it, and Gabby was clearly embarrassed. For some reason, we started using Charlie's real name, which we typically avoided. Laura said it 3 times, and I kid you not, Charlie showed up. Like, out of nowhere. He climbed on top of the dugout, holding a baseball bat, and just stood there, staring at us. It was not scary in a horror movie way, but there was something deeply unsettling about it. We all froze, unsure if he had heard us. He gave me a quick nod after I awkwardly waved at him, and then jumped down and walked away like it was nothing. As soon as he was gone, we burst into nervous laughter, but deep down, I could not shake how eerie it felt. The next weird incident happened at Laura's house. We were just hanging out in her room, her parents downstairs, chatting about random stuff. Somehow, Charlie's name came up again, and we said it 3 times in the span of a few minutes. 10 minutes later, we heard the front door slam. We thought it might be one of Laura's friends, but when we went to check, it was Charlie. He was standing there, talking to Laura's mom like it was the most normal thing in the world. When she asked him what he was doing there, he simply said, "I was summoned." Laura's mom, who actually knew Charlie, calmly asked him to leave, which he did. Laura and I, on the other hand, were completely freaked out. As we went back upstairs, we whispered about how creepy it was. That is when it hit us. Both times, he showed up after his name was said 3 times. It felt ridiculous, but how else could we explain it? After that, our friend group made a pact to never say his name 3 times again. Things calmed down for a while, and I started convincing myself that maybe we were just overreacting. But then there was another incident. We were at Johnny's house, hanging out on his back deck. The conversation somehow landed on Charlie again. Johnny, ever the skeptic, refused to believe our stories, even after everyone confirmed them. To prove his point, he said Charlie's name 3 times in a mocking tone. When nothing happened immediately, he laughed at us for being so gullible. But then, moments later, Charlie appeared, hopping over Johnny's fence like it was nothing. We all went silent as he just stood there, staring at us. After a few seconds, he climbed back over the fence and disappeared. Johnny freaked out, accusing us of setting him up. We swore we had nothing to do with it, but he was too shaken to believe us. The last encounter with Charlie was the worst. I was home alone one night during a rare occasion when my parents were out. I invited a guy I had been talking to over, and we were hanging out in my room. It was raining lightly outside, adding to the whole moody vibe. At some point, I mentioned Charlie, which led to me telling the guy about all the creepy stuff. He laughed it off and, to my horror, shouted Charlie's name 3 times at the top of his lungs. Before he even finished, the rain started pouring harder, and there was a flash of lightning. Then I saw it, a silhouette standing in my yard, staring up at my window. I slammed the blinds shut and locked every door in the house. The guy with me tried to calm me down, but I was in full panic mode. When I checked again, Charlie was gone. The next morning, I found his hoodie in the corner of my yard, wrapped around some of my belongings that I thought I had lost. Charlie disappeared after that. He stopped showing up at school, and no one ever saw him again. To this day, I have no idea what happened to him, and I do not want to know. Story 2. I grew up in Denver, where snowstorms are just part of life. But this one particular night still sends a chill down my spine. It happened a few years ago when my buddy Eric and I were headed to a dinner party on a Saturday evening in the middle of a snowstorm. We decided to make a quick stop at a liquor store to grab something for the hosts, craft beers, and a bottle of whiskey. Honestly, the stop was a hassle. The snow was falling hard, and my car was not exactly built for winter roads. After we grabbed our drinks, Eric ran back into the store to pick up some nicotine pouches, his latest obsession. I was annoyed since I was the one driving, and the roads were already bad enough. Finally, he got back in the car, and we set off. The snow was coming down heavier now, blanketing the roads and making every turn feel like a gamble. The route to the party should have been simple, a 30-minute drive through neighborhoods I knew like the back of my hand. But nothing in my life is ever that easy. The storm turned what should have been a routine trip into a nerve-wracking ordeal. I am not the world's best driver, and with the car slipping every other minute, I was gripping the wheel like my life depended on it. A few miles in, I turned a corner and saw something that made my stomach drop. A car sitting in the middle of the road, hazards blinking. Both the driver's and passenger's doors were wide open, and it looked like no one was inside. I slowed down, unsure of what to do. Part of me just wanted to drive around it and keep going, but Eric, always the good Samaritan, insisted we stop. "Come on, man," I told him, "we are already late." But he was adamant. "Someone could be in trouble," he said. Reluctantly, I pulled over and stopped a little way back from the car. We sat there for a few seconds, watching through the windshield. The hazard lights blinked like an eerie beacon in the snow, cutting through the darkness. Eric suggested we get out and check it out, but I was not sold on the idea. Something about it felt off. I asked him to wait a few more minutes, hoping maybe someone would appear, but no one did. Eventually, Eric had enough. Without waiting for my approval, he stepped out of the car and trudged toward the vehicle. My stomach twisted with unease. As he got closer, I thought I saw something, a shadow shifting in the corner of my vision. My heart was racing, and every instinct screamed at me to leave. Then, out of nowhere, I thought I saw the car move, just a little, like something, or someone, was inside it. That was it. I slammed on the horn, startling Eric, who was peering into the vehicle. He turned to look at me, saw my panicked face, and sprinted back to the car without a word. The second he got in, I floored it, speeding away from the scene as fast as the snow would allow. "What the hell?" Eric snapped. I told him I thought it was a setup, a trap. He scoffed, annoyed, but I stood my ground. I was not about to risk our lives for someone who could have just called for help. The rest of the drive to the party was tense, with Eric sulking in silence. When we finally got there, the warm atmosphere and friendly faces eased the tension. We ate, laughed, and eventually forgot about the strange incident on the road. A few hours later, as the party was winding down, the host turned on the TV to check the weather. That is when everything changed. The local news was reporting on a carjacking that had happened just 2 hours earlier, right around the same time we had stopped. The victim, a woman driving her teenage son, had stopped to check on a seemingly abandoned car with its hazards on and doors open. As they approached, 3 men jumped out, 2 from behind a snowbank and 1 from the car's trunk. They held the woman at gunpoint, stole her keys, and sped off with both her car and the one used as bait. My heart sank. I looked at Eric, and he looked back at me, both of us pale as ghosts. That could have been us. We shared what had happened with the rest of the party, and while everyone was fascinated, the mood definitely shifted. To this day, I cannot shake that memory. It left me more suspicious of strangers than I ever thought possible. I hate that I now hesitate to help someone who might genuinely need it. But after that night, I cannot help but think, what if it is all just another trap? Story 3. The events I am about to share happened over 30 years ago when I was just a kid. I must have been around 10 years old at the time, so forgive me if some details are hazy. My family was enormous. So big, in fact, that I struggled to keep track of everyone. Every family gathering felt like meeting strangers who somehow already knew everything about me. My dad was one of 9 siblings, which meant I had 8 sets of aunts and uncles just on his side alone. My grandparents were well off and owned a massive beach house where the whole extended family often gathered during the summer. The place could easily sleep over 30 people, and most summers, it was packed. I loved those summers. I got along great with my cousins, and spending time at the beach house felt way better than being stuck at home. Out of all my aunts and uncles, my favorite was Uncle Joe. He was different from the others. Always funny, kind, and someone you could trust with anything. He was a therapist, too, so he had this way of making you feel understood. That summer, though, I started having nightmares, horrible, vivid ones. They were the kind of dreams that left you waking up in a cold sweat. Sometimes it was about losing my family. Other times, it was about being left completely alone. The worst part was that they just kept coming, night after night. After a few nights, I decided to tell Uncle Joe. He listened carefully, scribbling in his little notebook as I poured my heart out. He told me he would think about it and come up with a solution. A few days later, I updated him that the nightmares were still happening. He told me he had figured out the problem. Deep down, I was frustrated with my parents and had unresolved resentment toward them. That hit me like a ton of bricks. I had never thought of myself as anything but a good kid. I loved my parents, and I always listened to them. But Uncle Joe was a professional, so I figured he knew what he was talking about. He told me to try pushing back against my parents, to say no more often and stand up for myself. He said it might help me deal with those feelings I supposedly had buried deep inside. So, for the next few days, I acted out. It felt awful, and my parents noticed immediately. They sat me down and asked what was going on, but I did not know how to explain it to them. The nightmares did not stop. If anything, they got worse, more vivid and more terrifying. I went back to Uncle Joe, desperate for another solution. He told me there was one last thing we could try, but he seemed hesitant to share it. After I begged him to tell me, he said something that still haunts me. He told me my mind was too mature for my young body, and I needed to set it free. I had no idea what he meant by that, but the way he said it made my stomach churn. He told me to wait and see if I had one more nightmare, and then he would explain. That night, I went to bed terrified. I woke up suddenly in the middle of the night, sweating and feeling like something was off. I was too scared to move or even breathe loudly. Then I heard it, a whisper right next to my ear. It was Uncle Joe. I bolted upright and screamed, and he jumped back, startled. Without saying a word, he ran out of my room and shut the door. I did not go back to sleep. Instead, I ran to my parents' room and told them everything, about the nightmares, about Uncle Joe, about everything he had said and done. My dad did not waste a second. He stormed into Uncle Joe's room, demanding answers. Uncle Joe denied everything, but my dad grabbed the satchel Uncle Joe always carried with him. A fight broke out, and Uncle Joe eventually fled the house. Inside that satchel, my dad found something that made my blood run cold. Pages and pages of notes about dreams, nightmares, and strange psychological experiments. Some of it was handwritten. Some of it was printed articles about inducing nightmares and other disturbing topics. The police eventually got involved, and when they searched Uncle Joe's computer, they found even worse things. I will not go into detail, but it was clear that his intentions were far from innocent. He was arrested, and I never saw him again. To this day, my parents refuse to talk about what happened. I try not to dwell on it, but sometimes I wonder how I could have been so naive. Then again, I was just a kid. There was no way I could have known.